Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at Economist Impact's event on commercializing quantum. My name is Gilead Amit, and I'm a science correspondent at The Economist in London. I'm delighted to be moderating this fascinating panel discussion today on the role of quantum computing in the cloud, and we're joined by four distinguished panelists: Ilana Wisby, Chief Executive Officer of Oxford Quantum Circuits; Blake Johnson, Distinguished Research Staff Member and Quantum Platform Lead for IBM Quantum; Michael Brett, Principal Specialist in Quantum Computing for Amazon Braket, AWS; and finally, Jungsang Kim, co-founder and chief technology officer at IonQ. Full biographies of all four, abridged by me in the interests of time, can be seen on the event website. So I'd like to begin by going around the virtual table, as it were, and asking each of you for your thoughts about the current state of play in this field. And specifically, it stands to reason that not everybody who wants access to a quantum computer can afford to build one in their office or afford to maintain one thereafter. So who, in your view, makes up the bulk of the market at present for quantum computing in the cloud? And what options for remote access are currently at their disposal?
So at AWS, our job is to bring infrastructure for compute and do that undifferentiated heavy lifting of the infrastructure of compute to the cloud. And that applies to all manner of compute, whether it's CPUs or GPUs or other specialty processors and technologies around that. And quantum computing for us is no different in the way that we approach bringing compute and doing undifferentiated heavy lifting of compute services. So over the past 18 months or so, AWS has been operating a service in general availability we call Braket. It is just another form of compute as far as we're concerned on the cloud. We've got a fantastic partnership with Ilana and her company at Oxford Quantum Circuits, and also with Jungsang and his company at IonQ, in providing access to a range of different computers, and then a platform that those that are interested in using quantum computers can work with. Now, your question, Gilead, was around who are the users of these services today. And the primary use case is research. So it's researchers that are coming from universities and national labs and even R&D departments at large enterprises that are getting access to these early stage devices and doing good, high quality science on top of that, so that we can understand where to go next with quantum computing in the cloud. So what are the improvements that we need to make at the hardware level, in the middle layer of the stack, and then in the applications layer? And one of the lines that we use at Braket is that the primary purpose of Braket today is to learn how to build a better Braket tomorrow. We need to learn the lessons from these early stage devices, from what the end users are interested in, gather the research from a science first objective, and then inform the development of future technologies from that.
Thank you, Mike. Blake, you were the only panelist not name-checked, so perhaps it would be great to hear your perspective as well.
Sure. So my colleagues at IBM launched the first online quantum computer in 2016 with the Quantum Experience. Since then, we now have over 20 quantum systems available online, either directly through an IBM Quantum portal, or as of a few weeks ago, integrated directly into IBM Cloud accounts. So there's a variety of ways that you can get access to that hardware, both in a free and a paid model. That free option is interesting to add to the research story that Michael just talked about, is that another one of the cohorts that actively is using quantum hardware are learners and educators. The offering some quantum hardware for free really enables an ecosystem to emerge around education and learning, where we can start to teach quantum mechanics, not through just pencil and paper, but actually having people run prototypical quantum experiments on actual quantum devices and bake that directly into a digital textbook, which is something that's kind of truly remarkable and couldn't have been done even 10 years ago.
Okay, so we've heard about research applications and education. Jungsang, is there another set of customers at the moment that occur to you?
Yes, I think the quantum computers are starting to be accessed by a very large range of researchers. In the early days, it was mostly people who are doing quantum computing research. But as Blake mentioned, there are lots of educational access demand for that. And we're also seeing a lot of the non-traditional industry who have very challenging problems where the classical solutions are not necessarily providing an effective solutions to them. And these are generally they are not very familiar with quantum, but they have a lot of domain knowledge. And I think some of those partnerships where we're seeking new ways to tackle problems using quantum approaches is, I think, another rapidly growing sector of space. I think there are many different modes that our collaborators and customers and clients can access our system. One is through cloud partnerships, like as Michael mentioned with AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platforms. These are easy ways for users to access it. But then the mode of access at this point seems to be very rudimentary at this time. And I do believe that over time, as more sophisticated users who are really trying to solve real world problems with quantum computers start to explore new methodologies, I think the complexity, sophistication, and diversity of those access methods, I think, will continue to grow in the coming years.
Okay, thank you, Jungsang. Ilana, the poison chalice is back with you. What do you see as the current demand and availability of access?
Well, I think obviously a lot of the challenges that come with how you would use a quantum computer today, can even be as simple as when is it online, right? So with AWS, we're able to launch Lucy for the first time opening up Europe, which actually served as being able to open up the European time zone for AWS for customers as well, which was really, really important and a big moment for OQC, being able to get Lucy available through that public cloud access. So customers can then log on to Amazon Bracket and access Lucy directly. Now, of course, we also do have private cloud access. So customers can come directly to OQC. And all of this is all about trying to onboard as many different customers as possible, get people interacting, get people learning how to use a quantum computer today, what that looks like for them. But it's still something that's quite separate, and like our vision and the world in which you want to be able to just spin up a quantum processor is you're spinning up a QPU alongside a GPU, alongside your classical CPU. And it's like, how do we create that world, that infrastructure, whereby you don't have queues, you can just be hybridizing between classical quantum compute, and the customer doesn't care ultimately what type of computer they're working with. They just want to be able to direct the problem to the most effective solution, and that quantum solution being one is something that's an incredibly exciting offering, and one that QCAS is that first step towards.
Thanks, Ilana. Jungsang, I was just curious, you were talking about non-traditional industries that might eventually be able to use the cloud for in order to help them solve their problems. Do you have a sense of which sorts of fields that those might be in?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is both industry and research. Even in research groups, we are starting to see people who are not familiar with quantum computers. For example, in physics, we're seeing high-energy physicists, quantum chemists, who traditionally use more traditional methods of computing. We're starting to explore new methodologies. So that research, I think, is very much in the early stage, but growing very rapidly. And then I think in industries, we're seeing people in the finance sector, automotive sector, aviation sectors, transportation, many sectors in chemistry and materials, of course. And they all have their challenging computational problems. And they're definitely investing in R&D, research, and new methodologies to actually bring and discover new approaches to tackling their problems. So I think those are, we're already seeing a lot of activities in those areas. I believe as our quantum computers become more sophisticated and more powerful, those methodology developments, I think, will accelerate, and then the adoption will start to propagate as well.
Okay. Mike, we were hearing from Ilana about the coexistence of classical computing with quantum computing in this future world where we are able to access access both via the cloud. How do you see the two coexisting?
Oh, it's vitally important to the success of quantum computing that quantum computing technology is integrated into classical compute resources. It doesn't matter what kind of classical quantum process you intend to run, there will be some form of classical interaction that needs to occur, whether that's moving data around from a database to storage to then putting it into the processes that you want to run on quantum, or a fully hybridized quantum classical loop that you need to go through in a high performance compute context. And that's one of the areas that AWS has invested in really heavily in bringing Bracket to the cloud, and then the quantum computers that we make available is tying that into an integrated cloud environment so that you can access high performance compute resources, storage, database, all those other tools that you need to build up workflows and to provide a business outcome or a research outcome to the end user. To that end, one of the recent improvements that we've made to Bracket is launching a feature called Hybrid Jobs, which is a fully managed containerized environment to handle both the quantum and the classical resource. So the end user can bring together one program and call both the quantum computer and the classical computer together into one hybridized environment. And then AWS handles on behalf of the user the resource allocation across there. And that's been an incredibly popular new feature for Bracket, so that both the quantum and the classical resource are brought together into the one environment.
And Blake, at IBM, are both quantum and classical seen as being equal partners as well?
For sure. I mean, we view these as complementary technologies for a variety of reasons. One of which is that as wonderful as quantum computers are, they're not going to be good at every problem, right? We understand their utility to be powerful, but at least initially it's going to be narrow. And it's never going to be all of computing where it makes sense to deploy a quantum resource. Something which is changed in the last few years, though, is to the extent to which we understand that classical computing can accelerate what we're trying to do in the quantum world. Michael mentioned sort of hybrid algorithms, but even more recently, there's research techniques that have looked to extend the power of quantum computing with sort of classically assisted methods. Things like entanglement forging, which can emulate the effect of a quantum circuit, which is twice as large as your quantum hardware can execute, by executing a variety of quantum circuits and then stitching together the effective result with classical linear algebra effectively. And so there's really exciting domains now where we see that bringing quantum and classical together actually create a more powerful technology, not simply that the user's workflow may have a quantum step and a classical step, but that really by combining the technology, it can really do something more powerful. And for that reason, we're investing in a variety of different technologies that make those quantum classical combinations easy in a so-called frictionless way, starting with the Qiskit runtime, which is also a containerized execution environment for co-locating classical computation next to your quantum hardware, which we launched last year.
Ilana, I was struck by something you were saying about private cloud access versus public cloud access. One of the sub-themes of this discussion is the notion of democratizing access. I wonder the extent to which you think there are going to be public networks in order to meet the demand that people who can't afford the computer but could make good use of it might have.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important. One of the things that we're very passionate about at OQC is, building an ecosystem, and this is such a tremendous opportunity for the quantum ecosystem as a whole to make decisions today as we're developing the infrastructure, we're developing the ecosystem, we're also developing the ethics. And I think, what both IBM and AWS are doing a fantastic job of is making sure that we're providing an infrastructure that enables accessibility, through these type of researcher credits, through this ecosystem development. And for OQC, that's something that's really important for us as well. So partly that's through education, but also with a public cloud access by being able to make sure that it's available and accessible no matter where you are in the world. I think that's one element that's incredibly important. With that said, we also need to be incredibly aware that people are working with often incredibly sensitive data. So there does need to be a balance between what's coming through private cloud access as well, and how we securely manage data so that we can make sure that we can validate that data security no matter what type of computer you're working with or what forum or infrastructure you are accessing a quantum computer through. So I think that's certainly an angle that, from a customer perspective, we heard a huge amount about. Initially when you started talking to users, they were like, "Well, our data can't leave the building," and people were saying, "We might need to put a quantum computer physically in the building." You quickly realise that that's not exactly what they mean, and there are lots of different ways in which we can work around that. But providing that end-to-end secure infrastructure is going to be important in order to make sure that we're also building a secure and accessible and safe ecosystem and infrastructure as we build this future.
Thanks. Jungsang, I wonder, are these questions of access and security, are these questions that keep you up at night?
Sure. So in two ways, right? For on the access side, I do believe that the thriving future of quantum computing, we do need to provide access to a wide variety of potential users, whether they're students who are just trying to get familiar with quantum, who will actually drive the innovation in the future, or current industry users who is exploring to tackle some reasonably serious problems, but by exploring new techniques. So those may have different access to different types of resources. Maybe the level of investment they can make could be quite different. How do we accommodate these various different modes of access needs that will be critical to growing the quantum ecosystem? And I think the democratise access means people with the right level of resources get the right level of computational power and the configuration, so they can get what they need. And I think that's why different modes of access through partnerships with cloud partners for dedicated access with some of our internal experts working closely with some of these more dedicated customers. We need to provide many of those options. Now, in terms of data security, I think if you're in the education space, data security is less of an issue. But if you're in industry or government users, data security is a big problem. So, how do we actually accommodate that? Depending on the institutions, they have different level of tolerance in terms of what's acceptable. And I think the industry has to continue to kind of explore and innovate in ways to meet those data security demands of different customers.
Blake, was there anything in there that you wanted to respond to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that in some ways our challenges for quantum computing are not all too different from the challenges of cloud computing as a whole as it tries to impact industry, right? Cloud computing has really emerged as a dominant paradigm for making flexible infrastructure configurations available and allowing teams to sort of offload their infrastructure to places like AWS, right? But AWS and IBM and many other companies have had a significant business helping companies adopt that model to address issues like Ilana mentioned at the beginning about their concerns about moving the location of their data and its security. And that's why you see things like hybrid cloud technologies emerge, or edge computing, where you offer various different ways to solve or ameliorate these problems through the location of compute with respect to the user's data. I think we have some interesting challenges in the sense that quantum computing, while it's growing rapidly, we're not at the scale yet where you can reasonably contemplate putting an edge device like in every ISP, in every data center. We're just not at that scale yet. I would love to get to that scale, but we're not there. That'd be a fantastic problem to figure out how to solve getting to that scale. The demand has to be there. But so we kind of stitch together solutions that make sense in various different environments. I do look forward to the one day when we have powerful enough quantum computers where there's a new set of techniques that will emerge that never existed before in the classical world. And I'm referring specifically to blind quantum computing, where we have ideas, concepts that don't exist in the classical world, where we can sort of provably send you a certificate that we have no idea what computation you wanted to do, but you can do it anyway. We can't see your data, but you get your result back. And that's something that will eventually be possible with fault-tolerant quantum computers. And I think maybe offers a unique benefit that you can't actually deliver with purely classical technology.
And would the idea there be that these new protocols could then be used within quantum computing itself, and it could reinforce itself?
Right. I mean, it's a model where you can offer access to a remote quantum computer and allow the user of that resource to have no trust that they don't want you to see their program, they don't want you to see their data, they don't want you to be able to know anything about what their computation is, and still actually be able to do useful work with that computation. There's and I think that's something fairly unique that you can offer. I'm not sure how you can deliver any other way.
Okay. Mike, we've been hearing about how some of the challenges of quantum cloud computing are very similar to the challenges of classical cloud computing. From AWS's perspective, how do you see the major differences there?
Yeah, of course, the long-term dream here is to have quantum computers from various providers that are housed in AWS data centers and operated just like we would any other form of compute. That's where we want to get to. But of course, as Blake mentioned, this is very early days in this technology, and the most feasible option right now is to work with hardware partners who are operating the devices themselves. The people who are best positioned to operate quantum computers are the folks that built them. And so we're working with them to build this, I guess, like hybrid model of placement of the computers where we've got the AWS data centers as close as possible to the quantum devices that we're accessing. But one of the things we say at AWS is that security is job one. It is absolutely the most important thing for our customers. That's where we earn the trust of our customers in security. And Ilana and Jungsang know well that the level of scrutiny that we put them under as hardware providers to meet the bar that's required to support our customers' interest in security is very, very high. And the bracket is built in a way that it meets all of the same requirements as any other service on AWS. And so we haven't lowered the bar at all for the security model for accessing quantum computing in the cloud, because we know that our customers, whether they're dealing with sensitive information for government or for financial services or personal private information in the healthcare sector, they want to be able to use quantum computers to explore these applications, and they need to be able to work at the same level of trust as they would any other technology on top of AWS. And so we maintain that same bar for quantum computing as we would for anything else in the cloud.
Okay. I'm thinking about these potential customers in the future who may, once the cloud quantum computing ecosystem is up and running, who might want to switch from one provider to another. And I wonder whether you see this being something that will be very easy to achieve, or whether it requires a certain amount of planning now in the early stages to ensure that this kind of interoperability is easy and customers aren't locked into specific arrangements. I'm happy to.
Conceptually, yes, that's what our customers are looking for, and that's what AWS wants to deliver for its customers. It's easier said than done. We do it in the classical compute world already. We've got a variety of different devices in classical compute, from Intel and NVIDIA and AMD and our own devices from AWS. And customers can move and select between different instances across those different technologies from different providers. And there's different price points available, there's different performance characteristics on the classical compute. And so we expect and we hope that the same will be true for quantum compute. And on Bracket, we built that infrastructure in a way that customers can essentially, with one line of code change, and sometimes literally one line of code, they can switch between different providers and target different machines. Now, easier said than done, and we know that for each device, there's a lot of different trade-offs that users need to make to get the best possible performance out of their application on the peculiarities of the different modality or the way that it's architected. And so we are trying to build in such a way that users can try out different devices. And I'd say that in the first 18 months of Bracket, one of the characteristics of users that we've noticed come through loud and clear is that users of Bracket want to try out different devices. When they come to Bracket, they're using different machines, they're trying out different techniques and different approaches. When we initially started the service, we anticipated that people would kind of come from one modality, like they knew, ion traps, this is what I need to run. And so they would use IonQ and exclusively IonQ. But what we've noticed is that people like to dabble. They will try out and with their favorite machine, but then start to look around as well and see what's possible on the different devices and start to understand those trade-offs that are there. And we're also seeing users look at a multi-cloud architecture. So use AWS resources for their classical compute, but then maybe try out IBM computers through a multi-cloud architecture. And that's totally okay. We expect people to be doing that and using quantum computers in the same way they do with the multi-cloud architecture in the classical compute world as well. So we're excited to see how that plays out. Our hope and our ambition is that users will be able to use different computers for different purposes and get different benefits for different applications, but we'll see.
Thank you. Jungsang, do you see that as achievable, being able to have a mostly interoperable cloud space?
I believe that I believe so, but it's going to be a function of time. I think the early users, they want a solution. They want to be able to tackle certain problems using the power of quantum. If quantum computers cannot provide that advantage, then I think people will eventually, those users will not be sticking to quantum. So I think it's very important that we get there. We provide computational capabilities that users can actually leverage. And then as the number of applications, and now we see what value is, they will start to build more sophisticated integration with hybrid, with the classical parts of it and so on. And as the users and use cases increase, there will be a demand for having more abstraction layers so that we can organize these things more systematically. And as you have more and more abstraction layers, it becomes easier and easier and easier to actually code at levels that are detached from quantum, but utilizing the power of quantum at the lower levels. So I do believe that this sophistication of how quantum computing QPUs integrate into a solution space is going to evolve. It's going to evolve more sophisticatedly, and as the demand increases, there will be more motivation for the suppliers, whether they're QPU vendors like us or cloud vendors, to provide that level of packaging so people can actually access those combination of resources in a more meaningful way. So it's and as that goes on, there's going to be more rules and more guidelines, and then things become eventually much more interoperable. So I think just like any other computing or telecommunications, when you build the first device that is providing unique value, people focus on performance and getting there quickly. But as the demand increases and the supply increases, it becomes closer to more commoditized solution. At that point, I think people will have a lot more flexibility, interoperability. All of these things will become focus of the industry to actually support the growing demand. That's my view.
Thank you. Thank you. Ilana, do you have anything you'd like to add on this?
Not much really. I think they've done a fantastic job of highlighting, where we are today and how the ecosystem is going to evolve. Industries will evolve, standards will evolve with that, and as standards evolve with that, then we'll have more and more interoperability built in with different, languages, with different kind of levels in which people could ideally have some sort of standardized interaction layer, for example, as you would with standard compute of how you start to work with these types of things.
Blake, just to ensure I'm not leaving you out, you're justified in saying that everyone else has covered the subject beautifully.
No, I mean, I think so. The good news is that there are some de facto standards that have already emerged, right? At the base layer, all gate model quantum computers today, or I shouldn't say all, most accept some form of the open QASM, that's quantum assembly language, description of the circuit that you want to execute. That didn't go through a formal standards process, but sort of emerged from literature and then becoming sort of an open effort to build support around a common way of describing circuits. And something that's interesting is, like, unlike kind of the instruction set that you use in a traditional processor like an x86 or PowerPC, this sort of quantum instruction set is really targets an abstract machine. It doesn't target any particular machine. It's sort of an abstract set of quantum gates that any particular hardware vendor may or may not actually support the particular set that the user writes their circuit in. But this also emerged in the context of a vibrant open source community around quantum computing and tools that can translate a circuit description from one set of target instructions to another set of target instructions in a way that the user is often even unaware that they're taking advantage of this capability when communicating with the various different cloud backends or hardware backends. And so I would say already today you can execute circuits on a variety of hardware with very little to no work in order to make that possible. What is the case, however, is that because the hardware systems are rather different in the kinds of gate sets they support and their topologies and connectivity graphs and so on, that you notice actually rather different characteristics of running a circuit. So a circuit that runs well in one architecture may run very poorly in another, and vice versa. So, I mean, the good news is that most of the time your program will run, but it may not run as you expect, or it may not run very well. So there's still a lot of, at least in these earliest days, still a lot of awareness that the developer needs to have about the hardware that they're using.
Okay, thanks, Blake. So to move on to a different question about the industry as a whole, I'm curious whether you think that cloud quantum computing is time limited in some sense, whether there will come a point where quantum computers are sufficiently cheap, sufficiently easy to manufacture, that there are enough of them for people no longer to need to access it via the cloud. Is that entirely unrealistic? Is that something that will eventually drop the curtain on the need for cloud access, or can it still offer something special? Mike, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
It's hard to imagine quantum computing playing out in a fundamentally different way to classical compute, where classical compute is ubiquitously abundant and cheap, and it has moved to the cloud. The true value of the cloud is not in the access to the particular devices themselves, but in the services and the value add that come from security and integration and user management and all of the things that bring this technology together with other different technologies to create a valuable application for the end user. And so I see quantum computing playing out in the same way, that as quantum computers become more abundant and the price point comes down per device, that they'll become more accessible in the cloud. This is sort of the first cloud-first technology that we've developed as a society. That the first place it's available is the cloud, and that's a little different for us to get used to. The first computers, the first classical computers, were devices in the lab, and then we had personal PCs, and then mainframes and those kind of things, and then it moved to the cloud. But quantum computing started in the cloud. The first accessible models were through a cloud environment, and maybe we'll see some go in the other direction, where there'll be edge compute devices and a few. There'll be opportunities for companies to deploy QPUs into environments where there isn't an ability to access the cloud in remote locations, whether that's in space or Antarctica or underground or those sort of environments. But I see quantum computing being a cloud-native technology that will be in the cloud for as long as the cloud exists until that paradigm moves on to the next thing.
Okay. Would anyone else like to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in and send my views. I really believe that we're in a very fortunate time. Infrastructure is available. But if you look at the evolution of classical computers, I think there has always been a pendulum swinging between a centralized resource with lots of users having some kind of an access, similar to the early mainframe concept, to completely distributed devices at the edge. We went through the PC revolution and so on. And then we came back. And I think the change really is the underlying technological evolution. If internet wasn't there, I don't think cloud infrastructure would have happened. But because people wanted their computational resources at their fingertips, and people and the industry has brought the cost of these computers down so they would sit at everybody's homes. But when internet went about, then it made the cost of communication was so low that it actually started to make more sense to aggregate those computational power and use it on demand. Right, so I think that oscillation is going to happen. We are incredibly fortunate to start quantum computing era in the presence of internet, and therefore we can start deploying the access to a very large number of people instantly, leveraging that infrastructure. And I think that's why the cloud partnerships are very important. But I think over time, as quantum computers get cheaper, smaller, potentially deployed to the edges, there will be lots and lots of applications, new applications that we don't think about today that will be enabled. Now, that may take some time for that to evolve. And then eventually, as Blake mentioned, if we did have a quantum internet where we can actually send quantum information in a completely secure way, then applications like blind computing, quantum computing, things like that will become enabled. And then maybe at that point, people will say, okay, aggregating a lot of quantum computing resources back into the core, having quantum access to those will become feasible. So I do believe that depending on the availability of underlying technology as it evolves, the optimal mode of utilizing quantum computational resources, I think will evolve. I think we're on step one, very similar to the mainframe days, except that the terminals can be anywhere in the world, which I think is an extremely fortunate place to be.
And then briefly, as we're running out of time, could I ask you all to just identify what you consider to be the most significant challenge, the biggest hurdle between us and this future we've been talking about? It may be something we've already discussed, but the one that you think is the most significant. Ilana, I'll start with you.
Sure, I'd say it's a push and a pull problem, right? We need to push the technology even further. We need bigger, better, more powerful quantum processors. And then we need the market pull and the market readiness to make sure that they can embrace them. And those two things colliding will enable us to reach that future soonest.
Blake?
I think Ilana said that beautifully, right? We need the performance to continue to increase and the requirements to useful applications to decrease to eventually intersect at a point that's not so far off in the distant future that we sort of run out of interest or patience before we get there. Fortunately, I mean, I'm optimistic that time is coming soon. But it's it's kind of the market imperative to convert this from a kind of early phase technology into something which actually penetrates more broadly into a broader market.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just reinforce the messages of Ilana and Blake. They're absolutely right. Just to get more, I guess, a little more specific, it's fault-tolerant quantum computing or error-corrected quantum computing, and addressing that as a major technology challenge. That's where the investment needs to go into the quantum hardware and building out the scalability of those computers. And then on the market side, it's finding the high-value commercial applications that can be the first users of quantum computing that create some commercial quantum advantage. As soon as that happens, that unlocks the opportunity for further investment into the hardware. So we're looking forward to that day.
Okay, and Jungsang, are you going to make it unanimous?
Absolutely. I think there are two challenges which are huge opportunities. One is How do you make sure quantum computers can actually start to do things that classical computers can't? And then I think the other one about the market pull is really a requirement that we need to innovate in that solution space. There's a lot of room there. I think there's a lot of unexplored opportunities that we can go find this killer application.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to Ilana, Blake, Michael, and Jungsang for joining me today. And thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.